Well, I'm certainly glad that each and every one of you look extremely awake and ready for Micah chapter 2. At least that's my hope and my prayer, that it will be something particularly meaningful and something that sticks out in your mind as you think about this prophet and you think about the Lord's work in your own life and how He's pointed you and directed you and pushed you more and more towards the Lord Jesus Christ. That's certainly where we're going in this particular passage. But for Micah chapter 2, I'd like to speak to you about three particular points in which Micah brings up throughout these 13 verses. I know that this is a bit of a larger chunk than we've been taking throughout this journey through Micah's prophecy, but I think all of these verses are so neatly knitted together that we needed to look at them as a whole. And so this evening I'm going to be speaking from this passage 3 points. The first one is the shriveling of the heart. The second is the driveling of the mouth. And the third, that doesn't as much rhyme with the first two, is the sheltering of the sheep. That's as best as I can do. So, first off, the shriveling of the heart. If you remember in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia, there is a boy named Eustace. Eustace reminds each one of us of some of our better moments in life, meaning, sarcastically, our worst moments in life. He reminds us of the one who fearlessly rides out into life, into the challenges of the day, thinking that he's always going to come out on top. Thinking that, oh, I see it, it's here, it must be mine. Even if it is a dragon's treasure that turns him into a dragon himself. And so the rest of the story is how will Eustace ever become a boy again, because he has become a dragon with scales as hard as his heart has seemed. Will this adventure turn out to be useful in Eustace's life? Micah 2 is a journey very much like that. Micah 2 drags us, as it were, into the depths of what it means to live in a wicked and an evil world. Now, if your eyes are opened and if your ears are opened in this time, you may not need that great of an imagination to know what evil looks like. Am I right? Not everything we read on the news is positive and happy and gets us up in the morning and makes us say, yay, what a wonderful world in which we live. Not quite. So Micah begins with giving us a picture of what we can expect from life in the world and those who live in it. But what we can expect from those who work and who do evil, and whose hearts are filled with this evil. I don't think he's excluding anyone. And so he begins, woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. It may seem that this would need a higher parental guidance rating as from the start, but that's not exactly where he's going here. He's saying, woe to you who work evil and wickedness that begins even in your heart, even before you've gotten out of bed. He says this doesn't just happen during the day, this happens in the night as well. And he uses the word woe, and Scripture uses the word woe in a very serious manner. It's not to just be passed over. In fact, when Jesus uses this word, he is speaking, he says, woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, those who should know better. You're like blind guides, he says, for example. This word of woe is reserved for sincere and blind walking in that which we know to be wrong and evil. And so Micah is pointing not only to sin in this kind of unknown hole, but sin that lies resident in the heart. I think we've spoken about this a number of times already. But that is what he is doing. And he's saying, woe not to something that has been committed in the day yet, but woe unto those things that have only been dreamt of in the mind and played with in the heart. But we don't know anything about that. We don't ever dream about things in which we shouldn't dream. We don't ever desire things in our heart that are not for us. Yes, we do. We absolutely do. When God commanded Israel concerning his own heart for holiness, he said, do not covet. You shall not covet. It's one of the great 10 commandments that he gave to his children of Israel so that they would know that he is holy and other, and that this is the way in which they were to walk to be like him. And so knowing these things, we understand a bit of where the example comes from. But the problem is that the way in which evil continues to grow in our hearts is quite often we think of those thoughts, those dreams, we think of them as quite subtle, rather harmless, innocuous would be a good word for them. They're not really bothering anybody else. They're not working out in my day-to-day life. They're just an area in which I go to play. And so evil can be subtle. It can be subversive. It can be, we can think about it like that even in ourselves. Evil, like Satan himself, does not always draw you into an open conflict. It doesn't want drama. It doesn't want you to notice how bad the war really is. It wants you to say that it's in check and it's contained and it can be stopped at any moment. Right? It's in bounds. More about the bounds in a minute. Because if it looks too violent, if it looks too loud, it sets off alarms. It might reveal to us something's really wrong in here. We're not at home anymore, are we? I didn't realize we had gone this far. This doesn't look at all familiar. I thought we were staying close to home, but we've kept wondering and we've wondered, and now I don't know. That's how sin slowly draws the blindness across our eyes. Satan doesn't always just enter from the front door. Sometimes he just leaves the back door of our hearts open. He just opens it so those thoughts, those dreams, they have the freedom to come in and out as they please. And so some of those thoughts and those dreams that you would never, ever share with anyone else, those thoughts and those dreams which you would never publicly knock on their door and say, why don't you come in? Why don't you come in to my heart? Why don't we talk about this? Why don't we play? We would never do that. But if they're already there, why not stay a while? Nobody else knows anyway. That is a better picture of how our own nature works to subvert evil and to belittle it, to say it's not really that big of a deal. Because there's places that I would be ashamed to go, but there are places that I'm unashamed to visit as long as they're in here. That's the situation that's going on in Israel and Judah. That is the situation of the heart. That is the situation of the evil that is working on the inside and working its way out into the cities and into the towns and wreaking havoc on God's people. They are being eaten from the inside out. But it is It's what I've said. It's just a private space. That's what we tell ourselves. It's the lie that we continue to tell ourselves. This is my space. No one knows about it. No one will ever know about it. That's what we tell ourselves about our sin. This is something that I don't have to deal with right now because I have plenty of time to deal with it, because there's no time stamp upon it. There's no one that knows about it. There's no one that's given me a deadline to deal with it. I don't want to be too hard on myself. After all, I've made strides. Things are a bit better, aren't they? I'm not truly doing anything wrong. No one during the day knows that I'm any different. And if I wanted to, I could come out in the morning and nothing will ever be or will ever look different. Everything will just be what I can remember in my past. These thoughts, these dreams, these desires, I'm in control. They will be gone tomorrow. So today, tonight, just let me wonder. Just let me wonder in my own mind. And yet when the morning comes, and we have actually culminated the sins that we were just thinking that we would play with for a bit, or when the day comes and we think back over the events of the day and the dreams and the designs that we thought were only in our minds, they became realities. And our hands have taken us to the place that we thought only our mind would go. We make excuses and we say things like, I don't know what happened. I fell or something. And we wonder how we got here when we ignored the heart, when we played in the mind, when we shut God out where He should have had reign and rule. That's the situation in Israel and Judah. And we can see how Micah describes this as covetousness. He says that's the main thing that is going on. That is the sin that is eating my people. And that is the sin by which they are harming one another. And this is why my anger has been kindled and my justice will be done. To be covetous is to desire that which is not ours. And many times that which we desire, that which we covet, it should never be ours. But we tell ourselves we deserve it. We tell ourselves it's a good thing. We justify for our own hearts the things that we want. And that's why covetousness, this sin in which we covet, to use it as a verb, it is one of those sins that is a shriveler of the heart. It shrivels the heart until where it's unrecognizable any longer. This wicked behavior, this desire, this greed, it's like a cancer. It was a cancer in Israel. It was a cancer in Judah. It hid the temple. It hid out and it boxed out true worship. And that's why Habakkuk, years later, coming after Micah, he's in Jerusalem and he's looking at the situation that Micah had only seen almost at his infancy at this point. And he's looking at it and he says, there's only one thing left. It is so bad. The cancer has progressed so much. It has eaten away the very foundations of life and godliness that the only thing left is that the Lord come. That's what Habakkuk had to say. That was the only thing left. But the people thought that adding possessions would secure their future. They thought that if they could just, when things were bad, if they could grab all the land and the vineyards and all of the family farms that their family should have had, after all, do you know who we are? That would secure their future, that God had given them this land, and these were just bumps in the road. This was our future. This was our good. How dare anyone say that we can't have it? That's what they were doing in Israel. Even the division, even the border between Israel and Judah was being squabbled about during this time because of the divided kingdom that had been dividing continually, and a visual picture of the divided heart that was alive in the territory. And yet Paul, commenting on these events, said greed is actually idolatry. Greed is actually worshiping and bowing down to idols that we've made in our own minds, idols that cannot speak, idols that cannot hear, idols that are truly not God. It has been said one time past that the shriveling of the heart is like this. It's like the worst kind of death. It is imperative that we escape this cultural obsession with self-gratification, which is the primary manifestation of inbred covetousness. Was that said about Micah's time or now? I think both. So the shriveling of the heart comes when this covetousness is full grown and its relationships show how dire the situation really is. And it culminates in our desire to gratify every desire that we have, no matter what the cost, no matter what people think, no matter what the rules are, no matter what people have said is true, no matter what my spouse thinks, no matter what my kids think, no matter what my family thinks, no matter what I may have thought in my earlier days. But Micah just doesn't make this up out of thin air. You know that? He's actually talking about a specific event that happened in Israel's history. King Ahaz. He's talking about a specific, he's calling out Israel for a specific wicked event that happened. And he's saying that event from King Ahaz's life, it is a picture of who you are. That event happened in 1 Kings chapter 21. And that's exactly what verse 2 is telling us in this particular section. But if you want to turn to 1 Kings 21, I think you'll see very quickly what I'm referring to. Because in verse 1 it reads, "Now Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And after this Ahab said to Naboth, 'Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house, and I will give you a better vineyard for it. Or, if it seems good to you, I'll give you its value in money.' But Naboth said to Ahab, 'The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers.'" This is a divinely given place. He can trace it back in his ancestry to the land that God had given them. Ahab went in his house and he pouted and whined. I'm moving ahead and paraphrasing, but that's exactly what happened. And so, continuing on, his wife Jezebel, up to verse 5, said, "I'll figure out a way to get this. You shall have it. Take up your food and your drink. Quit whining. Are you not the king in Israel? Is there not a man in this house that can take what he wants? Is there not a king who can show that he is truly king?" And so what happened, and I will tell you without reading the rest of the chapter, is that Ahab has Naboth killed, stoned. Not only Naboth, we're told much later in 2 Kings, when this looks to be avenged, but Naboth and his entire family. Not only was his inheritance taken, but his familial inheritance taken as well. And this was the nature of how Israel's injustice, the depth of how deep it ran. That's what he's referring to in verse 2. It is the shriveling of the heart of the king, the shriveling of the heart of the people. And so Micah continues on in this way that harkens back to what Jesus quotes from Leviticus and also from Exodus. He says that, there is an eye for an eye, there is a tooth for a tooth. That's actually two quotes from the way justice was to be enacted, that the punishment would fit the crime. And so when God executes justice, He does it perfectly, but He also shows that the justice should fit the crime that is committed. And so if the people of Israel and the people of Judah have taken inheritance that does not belong to them, if they have wronged their own people, then He will remove from them the inheritance that they think that is theirs. All the land of Israel, all the land of Judah. Do you remember that on the first week I said the Lord comes in might and in justice? That is the theme for this entire book. That's exactly what is going on here. And he says, Micah says, that you have been a proud people. And you're not going to want to hear what I say. Verse 6 is going to tell us that really clearly. These people are not going to want to hear Micah. In fact, they're going to want to kick him and put him in the ditch and say, be quiet. This is not going to happen. Do you hear me? But he says that the Lord is going to put on them a yoke around their necks. When we put on Jesus' yoke, it's light and it's good because we're yoked together to serve Him. But when they put on this yoke, what it does is it bows down these necks that have been proud and that have said, God's not going to do anything like that here. We're all safe. And so it humbles them in their place. But in verse 4, he continues on. And he says, in that day there will take up a taunt, a battle cry, a song of victory. Oppressors will come, and they will take this land. That is going to be the justice. That is going to be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Lex talionis. That's what it's called. And so what we have here is we have God saying, you may have turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to me. You may think that I'm like the idols that you serve, but I'm not. I have seen. I have heard the cries of your neighbors. I have seen the ways in which you have taken what was theirs. I have seen the wickedness that has been done in the land, and I will answer. Will He in our day? Yes, in His own good time. He has not missed anything. It is the Lord who will bring to account, and justice will be served in His own perfect wisdom. But in verse 5, he says, you fight against one another. He says that even Israel and Judah are fighting against one another. That's what he means by that sort of cryptic remark about a line in the lot. It's an inheritance that you were to have as a citizen in this land. But it's an inheritance they will not have because of their squabbling, because of their division. But in the second place, he says that there's not going to be dribbling in your mouths either. There's going to be shriveling in your hearts, but there's also not going to be dribbling in your mouths. Our text says that, Micah, don't preach. Stop it. No more. I don't want to hear you. And that's all they get to say before Micah breaks back in. So verse 6, do not preach, is all the crowd gets to say. The rest of it, it goes back into Micah's proclamation. He says, don't preach. Literally what the people are saying is, quit dripping, Micah. You're just dripping. You're just a sad sap. You're just dripping out of your mouth everywhere you go, and we're tired of cleaning our floors. Go away. Be gone with you. But actually what Micah says is, you're the ones that continue to drip out of your mouths. You're the ones that will be disgraced. You say we should not preach about such things. Micah's just preaching about that which is true. How many in this day, Micah's day, but how many in our day will not bear the truth? They will not hear God's truth. They will not believe His purposes. They will not believe that He's coming again. They will not believe that He set a standard. They will not believe in the King of Kings. He's going to come back to that in verse 11. But in verse 7, he continues on, and he takes this very fatherly tone. He says, should this be said, O house of Jacob? House of Jacob, he appeals to them. He appeals to them by their forefathers. Has the Lord grown impatient? Are these His deeds? Do not my words do good to him who walks uprightly? He appeals to them as family. But they are no family. No, in fact, he will say they are no family any longer because they do not act like family. And so they are people who say, my words, your words, they're not enough. They're not enough to matter any longer. What words? And that's going to be a very sad day. And it continues to go downhill because in verse 8 he says, my people have risen up as an enemy. My people, you strip the rich robe from those who pass by trustingly, with no thought of war. He says, Micah says, look, your words aren't trustworthy, but neither are your actions. People come into your city and they expect that they would be treated rightly. They trust you. They trust you to do business, and yet, as soon as they turn their back, you strip the robes right off of them. This has to end. You have to see how bad this is. Did you all see that there's a 14-hour law that's been enacted in Chelmsford yesterday so that people can be stopped by law and searched because the police are seeing that the robbery and the evil done against others is out of hand. Maybe some fear. Maybe if we find some of these folks, maybe this will be settled. Maybe this will be turned back. Very much the same situation. You don't expect going down the high street to be treated in such a way that you would have everything that you have taken, but it happens. Everything from your home taken. But you certainly wouldn't have expected that to be the way people were treated in God's country of Israel. But they were. And God says this is the state of things. But it cries and it shouts for God to come, for God to make right, for justice to be served. And that's exactly the way he continues to move. Because he says, when justice is not served, and when my people continue to go their own way, it is not only themselves that they ruin by the culmination, the fulfillment of their own hearts, of that which is evil, but their families, their children. Naboth didn't just lose his vineyard, he lost his life and all of his children. And so when we follow the desires of our hearts, it doesn't just affect our sleep patterns, but it is those sins that affect the second and the third generation, it even says in Scripture. What will your children remember about Dad? What will your children remember about Mom? What do your grandchildren say about Granny and Grandpa? Do they see one who encourages them and spurs them on in a godly life, who knows God's Word and who speaks about Him? Or do they see one who just acts like everyone else does? Are they moved by the fact that you are so selfless in the way that you live, in the way that you love, that there must be something incredibly different about who you are, incredibly unforgettable and unmistakable? There may be some application for me, and so I must go on. Maybe some for you as well. But the situation is dire, and so will there be a deliverance? Is there any hope for these? If their eyes are open, if their ears are unstopped, is there any hope for those who would turn and believe? Is there any hope for those who would trust? Is there any hope in Israel? Is there any hope in Judah? Are there any voices who would cry out? Are there any voices who would come after? Are there any sheep who would follow a shepherd? Well, verses 12 and 13 come very, very near the heart of that matter. And by the end, we are introduced to the shepherd king. And so for the first time, Micah offers hope. He says, I have brought you to this place so that you could see the depths of your own sin and your own need. Now, I turn your attention to the King of Kings. And listen to what he says. I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob, speaking tenderly to them. I will gather the remnant of Israel, those who are left, those who are faithful, those who cry out for mercy, those who seek justice, those who desire peace, those who desire God. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. What does God do? Not what the sheep do. What does God do? He puts them in a safe pen. He takes them out of the city of destruction, the city that is only known by the way in which it inflicts evil and wickedness against one another. And he puts them into his pen, his safe pen, and he keeps them there. But it's not just the best ones. It's not just the best little ones that have the brightest, whitest wool and that have the best behavior. There's a noisy multitude of them. It seems that God's gathered too many. It seems that He brought the undeserving sheep as well as the deserving. That's exactly what He did. This room is evidence. He didn't just pick the best. I think Darren said that this morning. He didn't just pick the deserving. He picked the undeserving. And this noisy multitude he put into his own safe pen and his own pasture. There is hope. In verse 13 he says, he who opens the breach goes up before him. God in the prophet Micah is called the great one, the one who breaks. The one who breaks open. The one who makes a breach in the wall that seems impenetrable. Did not Jesus Christ break down the wall of hostility that was between God and His people? Yes. He was the one who made a breach that we would come out. and be transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light, to the kingdom of his beloved Son. It's exactly what he has done here. He is the one who makes a breach. He is the one who brings them out. This is a picture of the new Exodus, a second Exodus that God is doing with his people, just as he brought them out of Egypt and he brought them through the tumultuous sea. He went before them and parted the water so that they walked across on dry land. And he will go before them. Look and see if I'm right. Verse 13. He says, he will go up before them. They break through the pass of the gate, breaking out by it. And what happens? Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. Yeah, the situation was hopeless. If you weren't sure about that, now we know. So Micah restores hope, and he says that even though this valley is deep and dark, those who trust in the Lord, he will be with them. His rod and his staff will be a comfort to them. And he will lead them through the valley of the shadow of death, and he will bring them out into his own pasture. And he will pasture them with cool grass and with water that is sparkling clear. And he will shepherd them, and he will care for them, that they shall never fear. And he will bring them out. He will bring them back into this pasture again. Yes, they will be coming out, but God is the one who will bring them back. And they can always look ahead. And who will they see? They will see the shepherd who has gone before him, before them. He will not be out of view. In fact, he says, I will never leave you or forsake you. And so that will be our posture as we look to him who has gone before us, as we look to him who has been the king, who has broken down the wall that separated us between our God and our sin. I think, if nothing else, this puts a healthy perspective on sin, the mind and the heart, and God's incredible power at work in us. And so if you gain nothing else from this evening, I trust that you've gained much more. Those things, being aware of the shriveling of the heart, the dribbling of the mouth, and the shepherding, the sheltering of the sheep. It is Christ and only Christ in all of that. So let's pray as we close this evening to the Lord our God.